Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another Thursday Night Live. I hope you're actually enjoying these live shows that we're putting on. We're certainly enjoying interacting with you guys, the audience, and getting your questions answered. Now, this week is quite a special week I wanted to bring onto the show. We're going to get Titleist involved. So Titleist are going to come onto the show, and I've brought Will Harvey. Now, Will Harvey is the Titleist Vokey rep. And with a slight difference, his position is on the European tour, dealing with lots of players that we watch each week on the TV. So I thought we'd bring Will on to answer a few of your questions. So Will, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Lee, welcome. How are you, mate?
I'm good, thank you.
Very good. So Will, just tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do with Titleist, and how does your sort of day-to-day, in normal world kind of work?
Yeah, so normal world, I generally attend 30 or so European Tour events every year. So it's looking after the players, whether it's getting just new grooves in their bag, whether it's working in new products, like traveling all over the world with the European Tour. We see different grass types, different areas, different temperatures, and that means guys need new wedges. So especially when we get to like the links courses, when we go to Scotland or over to the Irish Open, we need to change things around and like make sure the guys have got something in their bag that's working properly.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a busy job. There's a lot of guys out there using Vokey wedges, so it keeps me on my toes.
So, and your role is kind of like you're on the van and you're grinding away on those wedges on a daily basis. Is that how it kind of works?
Yeah, it's like you say, it's everything from the fitting process all the way through to the final build, the grinding of the wedges, making sure things are exactly right. These guys are good. They know down to a gram in weight and the dead weight of the golf club, and they can feel a degree of bounce. So it's making sure we get everything right exactly first time round, and then taking them out into the practice area and making sure what they've got in the bag is giving them the best performance. Like one shot in a tournament is a massive difference for a player. So we need to make sure we can save everyone we can.
Just before we carry on, I just want to let everybody know that there's an email address that you can send in. Lee will pop that up. Thursday Night Live 0. There it is, Thursday Night Live 0@gmail.com. If you send in any questions that you've got this evening to that email, Lee will get you up onto the platform and we can ask Will some questions. And those can be about the wedges that you're possibly currently using, or maybe you're struggling with, or even your wedge game. So if you've got any questions about how you attack the ball or what certain shots that you're doing that you don't necessarily like, now is a great opportunity to pop in that question, and then you can ask Will direct, and he'll be able to help you with maybe giving you a few ideas on what type of wedges to have, and maybe your attack angles, things like that to think about. And to me, Will, and I don't know what your thoughts on this are, but for me, people ask me lots of questions each week, about game-changing technology that's gone throughout the game of golf. And if you think about the driver releases that happen, and people get really excited about driver releases, and there's some really good stuff out there at the moment, but there has been for probably 5 to 10 years, I would say, that there's been some great releases of drivers, but not necessarily game changing. So we've seen progression, but not necessarily massive jumps within the game of golf. And you go back to the Pro V1 golf ball when that was released. I mean, that was kind of game changing to a point, but I would put the wedge design and certainly the grinds of what probably Titleist have brought to the party, I would say that Vokey's done an amazing job of probably changing the game slightly in that department. What do you think about that?
Yeah, 100%. If you look at club golf especially, majority of the shots people play are within 100 yards. So it makes a lot of sense to have a lot of options in that area. We need guys to get fitted into the best product so they can hit the best shots, get the best performance out of them. And as well as providing all those grind options, we need to make sure the product that they've got in their hands is performing the best. So that comes down to having the best grooves. You got to have the best shape as well. It's got to look great. If you sit something down and you don't like the look of it, you're not going to perform well with it. And the CG location is a massive, massive part. So that's going to help with forgiveness. It's going to help with ball flight, and it's just going to help you hit better shots more often. So all these combination of different things in there. So we've got the grooves in there for forgiveness, CGs in there for forgiveness and ball flight. And then the rest of the package with the grinds is really going to help you dial in and get the right club in the bag to save more shots. So it's been a massive change. If you look back from the start of Vokey wedges, the amount of grinds in increases most of the time. Every 5 or 6 years, there's stuff added in there. And it's just making sure we've got enough products in there to make sure everyone's got the right thing in their hands.
And going back to sort of Bob Vokey, should we say? You know, I mean, I was so lucky enough to meet him a couple of years ago out in the States and listen to him give us an explanation, demonstration on certain shots around the green, which was just priceless from a pro watching. You know, it was just fantastic. You know, has those grinds that we're seeing on the bounces and everything that kind of goes on, that's kind of evolved with different players, hasn't it? So he's had obviously good relationships with certain players, and they've wanted something edged off here or added here or whatever, and then I suppose him and Titleist have then brought it to market for retail. Is that kind of how it's unfolded?
Yeah, exactly right, and it's still happening to this day. So it's always evolving through the lineup of the wedges. S grind is a great one, for example. Steve Stricker was using an F grind. Was out on a golf course. He was chipping. It was a little bit firm that week, so everyone knows that feeling. Last summer when it was really dry, you go out, hit a chip, and it feels like the club's bouncing off the ground all the time. So Steve came back into the van and said to Bob, I just feel like I can't quite get into the ball. It's not giving me what I want. I can't get the ball up in the air. So Bob just took a ribbon off the back of the golf club, which is that line you see through the back of the S grind.
Yeah.
Steve goes back out, hits some shots with it, working really well, so he puts it in the bag. And the way that evolves on from there is Steve will probably go out and play with another player. So the players, they all always look in each other's bag. It's like when we're playing weekend golf, like you go out, you see what your buddy's got something new, you want to try it. Yeah. So someone would have grabbed it out, hit it, and said, oh yeah, I need to get one of them as well. So they're going to ask for one as well. 10, 15 players do that, and then it gets evolved, and then it ends up in the main lineup of wedges. And it's something that's happening to this day still. Yeah. So you see the products that have come through to Wedgeworks. They've all come on there because they've been really popular on tour. Move on to Wedgeworks so we can get an initial idea of what people in the consumer market think of it. If there's a real good uptake of it, then it might get progressed into the main lineup. I think D grind's the latest one you've seen, which has evolved from a high bounce M, which was a real popular option on PGA Tour. Moved on to Wedgeworks, sold really well, and then we get it as a D grind. So
and which I've put the D grind in this year or back end of last year and love it. Absolutely brilliant. I've gone from an F grind in my 56 or 54 degree into that D. It just gives me that little bit of maneuverability around the short game area, the chipping and things like that, to be able to lift the toe up a little bit and heel up. Yeah, it makes a difference. It does make a difference. So just a couple of questions that I've got before we move on to get some questions from those, and we've had some great questions come in. I just want to talk about a couple of our players. One of those being Lee, producer Lee. So for Lee, he is somebody that he tends to, and I see this with a lot of amateur golfers, is he struggles to manage loft. So when he's hitting his wedges, he struggles to manage the loft. So the ball will generally flop up in the air quite quickly. So I call it the wafty shot, where he's 100 yards out and he ends up sort of, he's still got 20 yards in after his next shot. So is there anything that he could maybe think about doing to try and manage that loft or understand it maybe just that little bit more?
Yeah, there's a few things we can do. In a club fitting perspective, the best thing to do with wedges is test them. So test as many options as you can. So if you can find a wedge that's going to help you play that shot and help improve that shot, then that's a good way to go. On the other side, if I'm putting my kind of not coaching hat on almost from what players have kind of expressed to me and how they work through these different things to get that ball flight right. There's a few different exercises you can set up. So if you have access to a launch monitor, if you could go for a lesson with your pro, maybe just look at your ball flights. There are some numbers out there, like 30 degrees of launch is typically what we'll see with a tour player for wedge shots. Anything between sort of 50 and 80 yards is a good place to start to get that flighting, because that's where a lot of people struggle. So if you can get that launching at 30 degrees and get the feel for that on a launch monitor, or if you haven't got access to a launch monitor, you can set up a gate. So just literally 2 alignment sticks, put one across the top and put it about 3 or 4 paces in front of you and just practice hitting under there. That will give you that better ball flight that you're looking for. And then it's a case of testing wedges and finding a wedge that's going to help you improve that and make that a lot easier for you.
Yeah.
A lot of guys I hear say, like on the range, when you hear the guys watching from the back, when they see tour players hit wedge shots, they almost like, it sounds like he's thinning it and it's coming out really flat with loads of spin on it. But when you see amateurs hit wedge shots, you go down the driving range and people hit wedges and he disappears out the top of the roof. So it's that complete difference. And it's a case of finding out what the tour players are doing and what that feel they're getting on their wedge shots and trying to transfer that into your own game.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's quite an important one because, I've got access to a launch monitor, and it's easy for me to say, you want to try and get on a launch monitor and work with your pro on this and the other. But there's a lot of people out there that don't have that. And certainly in the UK right now, being in lockdown situations, more difficult for people to sort of get out and test that. But I know lots of people have got things set up in their gardens where they can hit into a net or a little screen or whatever they've got set up. Certainly having that type of setup where you put the alignment sticks 4 paces out, get it right, get it underneath, and get an understanding of those windows. And that's, Titleist have created the windows, haven't they, from their fitting side of things, hit into windows, and you can start to understand what type of launches that you want to get from it. So I think that's a good point.
Exactly that. One of the players sent me a video the other day, and he's got his net set up in the garden, and he's literally put tape all the way up his net, so he's got these different areas to hit into, so he practices flighting at different heights. So when he goes on the golf course, he can think, right, this one's going to be a kind of a block 3, so I'll hit it on that flight. And it's just ways of building up these feels for when you get back out on the golf course. Correct,
because they're just all he's trying to do there is possibly access 2 different or 3 different pin positions, one at the front, one at the middle, one at the back, depending on what flight and descent angle that he wants to come in at with.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, bang on.
So we also have another player in our group who I know you did a fitting for some time ago now, actually, Lester.
Yeah. Yes.
I don't know where he is. He's not with us. He was supposed to be in at some point this evening, so he might jump in. You never know. But anyway, Lester, we've recently done some work with him with his wedge game, because he's somebody who's really struggled confidence wise. And I know you went for a fitting with him, and when he finished that fitting a couple of years ago, he was buzzing, like properly buzzing. How he was, you'd obviously worked with him a little bit on his launches and understanding it. Now, he is someone that actually went cross-handed and used to lean the handle way forward, ball position way back, and he was just chopping down on that golf ball. And we tried to get him to get the feeling of kind of releasing on it. But question number 1 with that is, do you see players on tour working cross-handed with their short game? So we've seen it with Matthew Fitzpatrick recently, actually in a tournament, chipping that way. Danny Willett has been doing some practice that way. Is that something that you're seeing out there?
You see a lot of different things week to week, but it is a good way to just kind of shore things up. It's quite a nice feel for someone who gets quite flippy underneath the ball. Like you said, that kind of wafty shot. Guys are finding the balls launching a little bit too high on those short chip shots. Going cross-handed or even goes for the putting grip on those shots is a good way to kind of sync everything together again and get that feel of everything being a little bit more solid. It's some guys like Lester like to go into it when they're on the tournament, but I'd say it's a good thing to mess around. When you're on the practice screen, short game's all about exploring options. Yeah. So I see tour players hitting shots from real strange places around the chipping green, but it's literally just kind of over practice. Do something that's outside your comfort zone a little bit, or do something that changes the feel a certain way. And it's all just getting those things working in your head a little bit better. We have guys request stuff, wedges for practice, where they'll have loads of loft on it because they want to try and hit it lower. So they feel like if they get a really lofted wedge, can hit that lower. Then when they get back to their normal loft, which is, say, 4 degrees less loft, then they're going to find it much easier. It's just exploring short game. I think that's why short game's so exciting. It's not rigid. The ball's not on a tee. It's not the same shot every time. It's literally a different shot every time you play.
And it's interesting to say it because, I mean, you probably would have been the same, but as kids, we used to meet up, and Lester and I used to do this, meet up on the short game area and have chipping comps. And you were putting, and when it was your go, you'd put them in like some awful positions, to try and get up and down from. And that's just getting the mind ticking, isn't it? Getting you into positions where you're trying to hit certain shots. But as kids, you don't really realize what you're doing. You're actually training yourself to be in the real world environment, you say.
It's the best way to practice, all the best wedge players that I've worked with, Rummy's a good one, for example. You go with him on the chipping green and he's always trying to do something new. I was with him at a tournament and he put a tee peg on the green and he was pitching it left and right at the tee peg and trying to spin it towards the hole from each way. And it's just stuff that you'd never really, you may do it in a tournament every now and again, but it's just something to kind of push yourself and give you something fun to do. You see a lot of guys going and chipping from the same place for an hour and it just gets a bit boring, to be honest. So take 3 golf balls with you, throw them in all different locations around the green, different lies, and just have a bit of fun with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Now, leading on from that with handle forward, those sorts of things. Now, I was someone that struggled with my chipping for a period of time. Used to lean the handle forward, get it digging in too much, and And I think it was either a video or certainly when I met Voki, he was sort of talking about getting the club to slide underneath. So getting almost the club head to catch up and take over the hands instead of leaning the handle forward. Is that something that it was almost like throw the bounce at the ball, throw the bounce at the, get the club working. Is that something you would agree with? Is that something that you would think about for players to get that club to take over a little bit more?
Yeah, 100%. Bounce is your friend. You'll see it all over the Voki website. It's what Bob talks about all the time. And I imagine he said that phrase exactly when he met you.
Yeah.
You've got to use the bounce. That's what it's there for. That's why we've got so many different options. So everyone needs a different bounce. There's all those options out there because you need to find the right one for you. But when you do find the right one, you need to make sure you use it. There's a time and a place for putting your hands forward and hitting that kind of punchy low shot in there. But the majority of the time, for a nice safe shot, just use the sole of the club, get it sliding along the ground, and it's going to give you the best opportunity to impact the ball. If you look at a lot of really good chippers hit shots, they actually put the club on the ground before it gets to the golf ball. So they actually just use the bounce and slide it underneath the golf ball that way. So it's something for you to practice when you get out around the short game area, maybe practice in the garden. See how far behind the ball you can kind of actually hit the ground. And it's a good way to get you using that bounce. You can actually hit it an inch, 2 inches around the golf ball. And as long as you use the bounce, it's not going to dig in. If you're using the leading edge and get your hands too far forward, you're not going to be able to get the club to slide. Yeah. You have to be very, very precise to get it to work with the leading edge.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. Right, Lee, shall we move on to some of our questions that have been sent in? And then have you had any emails come in so far?
I've had some emails come in and I've sent some requests out to join. So if you want to check your emails, /spam, possibly, there'll be something in there for links. But let's bring in our first question. And it's, do many tour pros actually use custom grinds?
They do. So like I say, a lot of my work is recreating orders for players. And we do use all the same standard products that you have in the store. Our main kind of lineup is the 23 models that we have at retail. But we have to alter those slightly for players. Like a player might need an option which has got slightly less bounce. So say an M grind with a degree of bounce taken off, or a player might need a little bit more heel relief because when they open the face, the club, they don't feel like the club's sitting close enough to the ground. So all these little tiny tweaks that, to be fair, the majority of people will notice, they won't be able to feel the difference. The tour players are so in tune with it, they know exactly what the difference is. We do have a few different options. We've got the things that are on wedge work. So you've got like your T grind in there and the low bounce K, which a lot of guys are using. And they're just all evolutions of what we've used in the past. So like a T grind's an evolution of an M grind, which has got a bit more trailing edge and heel relief on it. So you can sit it a little bit tighter to the ground. I'd say probably 60%, 70% of the guys have got kind of some alteration to their wedge somewhere.
Yeah.
So it all depends on the strike and what they're trying to achieve. A lot of the time that I see players is kind of trying to find those small incremental gains. Like I said before, if we can save a guy a shot over 3 tournaments, it's a big gain. So just by making sure they've got the right grinds in the bag and getting them perfectly fitted in there and getting it exactly right, it's an evolving movement. At the end of the day, it's not going to be something that we're kind of fit in January and we're going to still be using in December. It changes depending on how the technique changes with their instructor or how the turf conditions change, or they might have a certain tendency. They might gain a bit of confidence or lose a bit of confidence. So we need to make sure the product stays right for that player all the way through.
And on that then with players, like how often, well, number one, how often do they change when it comes to the clubs moving from tournament to tournament? Does that make sense? So obviously as they go through the year, they're going to, if they turn up at the British Open and they are, they're the Open, when they come on, Dan, get with it. So when they turn up at the Open and hopefully they'll be playing on tighter lies where it's nice and firm. But then a week later, they could be back in Florida where they're playing on Bermuda. I mean, how does that change? Do they change?
They do, yeah. So a lot of guys on European Tour especially carry a few options. I like guys to have a couple of lob wedges if it's something they're open to doing. Some guys like to stick with the same. It's kind of like, it's what I know. I know I change my technique when I get to different areas, so I'm quite happy with that. But some guys like to make sure that the lob wedge especially is a little bit more versatile. So when they do go from playing on Bermuda to going and playing an Open on Fescue, they've got different options in there. So guys might carry a low bounce option and a high bounce option. Some guys will carry a flat sole golf club like a K grind and then carry something with a crescent through it, like an M or an L grind, just to give those different feels. In terms of how often do they change, we generally work on like a 4-3-2-1 system with a lot of players. So 4 lob wedges a year, 3 sand wedges, 2 gap wedges, and a pitching wedge. Obviously, depending on where, and at the start of the season, to be fair, when they're all playing in Dubai for a few weeks and then they go off to Qatar and Oman, as we normally do, they're playing on sort of very sandy turf, so it wears the grooves out a lot quicker. So a lot of guys will finish kind of a couple of weeks in Dubai, they've been practicing locks at the start of the season, they'll want to change the lob wedge out. The time to change is when performance starts to alter. That's the key. I say to players, as soon as you see that ball flight start to creep up in the air, or you start to see a little bit of inconsistency in distance, that's when we need to look at putting some fresh grooves in your hands. And I think that's really, really key for weekend golfers as well. People will carry a wedge for 5, 6, 7, 8 years because it's something they feel like they trust and they feel like it's working well. They don't generally look at it. Whereas drivers, as soon as your driver's not working, you're straight back in the shop for a fitting. With wedges, it's really key. I think you've got a really good slide available there that we can have a look at, which is going to show you the performance difference. So there, it says a new wedge spins up to 2,000 RPM more than a wedge played for 125 rounds. When you stand in the middle of the fairway, 2,000 RPM doesn't really mean much to you. You don't really care too much how much spin you're getting. You just want to know the ball's going to finish in the right place. So how does that transfer to actual play and like kind of real-time golf? If you look on those run-out distances there, if you've got a wedge that you played for 125 rounds, you're going to get about 24 feet of rollout. This is all through robot testing we've done on an 80-yard shot. If you get fresh grooves and hit that same shot, you get 10 feet of rollout. So in the real world, imagine if you've got a flag that's 14 feet on that green. If you've got a wedge that runs out 24 feet, you're going to have to pitch it short of the green if you want to stop it next to the flag. Whereas if you've got that one that stops in 10 feet, yeah, you've only got 4 feet to pitch it in. But then if you do pitch it next to the flag, it's still only 10 foot past. So that's just a straight gain you can get by having fresh grooves or the right grooves in your hands. So 125 rounds for most people is a couple of years. If a guy plays a lot, it might be a year. So especially on that lob wedge, like make sure you've got the grooves in there that are giving you the ability and the forgiveness to hit those shots you need to hit.
Yeah. And that's interesting because obviously it then comes down to how many greens around you hit, isn't it?
Oh yeah, that's
so
a massive part.
If you're hitting 15 greens around, you probably might get 3 years out of a wedge. But if you're only hitting 2 greens around, you're going to probably get a year and a half out of a wedge.
Very, very true. Yeah.
Right, Lee. What else have we got there?
So he's been patiently waiting in the wings. We've got Kevin, who I'm going to bring into the stream.
Has Lester turned up yet? No, Lester.
He's not. No,
he's not arrived.
Has not arrived. But
not
Kevin
arrived
has
to the building.
Let's bring Kevin in. Hello, Kevin.
Good evening to you all.
Kevin,
okay.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm far better looking than Lester.
Yeah, there you go.
Just a quick question. You've been talking about fittings, mainly with the wedges tonight, obviously, but I know that you recommend a fitting. But would you say that it's much better to get the fundamentals correct, i.e. the grip, the stance, and how you're attacking the ball before you go for a fitting?
Go on, Will. You can have this.
I'll do it. Yeah.
Go for it.
So it is key to work on fundamentals. Obviously, a lot of the guys that I work with sort of day to day, fundamentals is the main part of their practice. They want to make sure they're getting that side of things right. The best thing to do when you go on a golf course and you get under pressure and you're playing a competition and you're coming down the last hole, you're going to revert back to how you play golf, how you're comfortable playing golf. So the best thing to do is get fitted, make sure you've got the right product in your hands, and then carry on working on your technique from there. It's not a case of if you say you've got an M grind and it's working well with your current technique. If you change your technique a little bit, it's not a case that wedge is just going to stop working straight away. It's going to be a case of it might work just a little bit better for you. So it's definitely worth getting fitted with what you've got, because when you do revert to that pressure, you see tour players do it as well. I'll work with them on a Tuesday and they've got the one technique, and you see them on the Sunday when they're coming down the stretch and they've reverted back to their old technique. So you need to make sure you've got something that's going to work for you when you get under the gun and when you get under a little bit of pressure. So definitely work on technique, but make sure you got the right wedges in your hands at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah,
sorry, Dan. I definitely agree with that. But at what stage do you think you should get a fit in? At what stage or what handicap? when is it the right time to get a fit in, and at what ability, if you like?
Yeah. So the earliest you can get a fit in, probably the best. Especially on the wedge side of things, I'll let probably Dan answer for the other side. Yeah. With wedges, when you're just beginning to play and you're just getting into the game, you're going to miss more greens than someone who's a scratch handicapper. So you're going to use them more often. So it's probably more important to get that fitting in there. I see a lot of people develop real bad chipping issues, and their technique tends to go bad because they might have the wrong product in the bag. So you'd be better off getting something that's going to work for you in the short term, or not so much the short term, or when you very first start playing, so you can develop those good techniques and those good skills from early on and keep that confidence there, which is what you need if you want to carry on playing and kind of develop your game.
I'll jump in as well, Kevin. I mean, for me, fittings and lessons kind of go hand in hand. So, you know, if somebody's coming to me for a fitting, we're generally talking about the game, the swing as well, when we're going through the process. And Will be the same on tour. You know, he will be working with tour players and probably their coach standing next to them at the same time, or their caddy or whatever, and giving out advice when required about how he's playing certain shots. And I think it's really important that my message really is find anybody that is going to help you with almost both departments, because I do believe that they go hand in hand, and that person should be able to help you, guide you when they know that you're going to need something different in the bag, or, you know, work on a technique to blend in with a wedge, like Will's kind of said there. So to me, I would agree with Will. It's get in as early as you can, but make that person aware that you're trying to that you want their help in both departments when it comes to the overall game. Does that make sense? So explain that all right with that.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
I think it really goes hand in hand. A bit of coaching, fitting, all together, and then you build the trust in that individual, that person, and then they help you get through all departments of your game.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Dan.
Thanks, all right, Will. Kevin. No problem. Thanks.
Cheers,
Kevin.
Thanks.
Cheers, Kevin.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Good question, that one. I get that a lot, and I think it's important to get that message across, that it's not, you know, coaching and fitting goes absolutely hand in hand, whether it's at the elite level or whether they're just coming into the game of golf. I think it just goes hand in hand, because a lot of people don't want to go for a fitting. They don't feel like they're ready for a fitting because their swing's going to change so much. You know,
I think when you hear tour players talk about the team, they call it a team because those people have to communicate so closely and work closely together to get all these aspects. Like, you have to get the fitting right, you have to get the coaching right, and the fitness side of it all together. And like you say, for a consumer, if you can get that all in the same person, then brilliant. It saves a lot of the trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I saw it for the first hand when I was with my brother Paul on the tour, and we were. And I saw the caddies being sent to the vans to pick up the equipment, or, you know, and the messages were being relayed there, you know, through the caddy to the player, and vice versa, you know. So it is a team. Yeah. You're right. It's an absolute you're right. It's a team. Yeah. Okay, producer Lee, what else have we got there?
So we've got another watcher live waiting to come in, and Matt is now coming into the stream. Welcome, Matt.
Evening, all.
Good evening, Matt.
Well,
how are you? Okay.
Yeah, good. Thanks.
Thanks for coming on. Thank you.
Question for Will then. With wedges, do you think it's better to have wedges of the same grind and bounce for consistency, or is it better to have wedges of different bounces and grinds to be able to play different shots?
Yeah, great question. If you look at the setup of some of the best players in the world, guys like Jordan Spieth, Justin Thomas, Adam Scott, what they'll tend to do is have something with a little bit more bounce in their sand wedge, and then go a little bit less bounce in the lob wedge. And what that'll allow you to do is be able to play different shots from different places. If you think when you go and play a round of golf, if you just literally write down the shots you hit in the last round you played, you might have a 40-yard bunker shot on one shot, and then the next shot you've got is a short-sided chip from a tight lie. So having the same bounces all the way through is going to really kind of narrow your options to hit those shots. Whereas if you've got a higher bounce and a low bounce option, straight away you've got two clubs to jump to for those two shots. So just being able to manage your bag and kind of get to know your wedges as well. So if you have these different options, find out where each one works best. By having the same bounce all the way through, some players do it. I'd definitely recommend having those different options in there just to give you a bit more variety. You've got to make it easy for yourself at the end of the day. If you've got a wedge in your hand, in your bag that you know is going to work really well when it gets wet, or when you get in soft sand, or when you get in some deep rough, but at the same time you've got another wedge in there that when it gets really dry and firm, or when you get in a tight bunker where the sand may be a little bit wet, or when you get really close to the green, it's going to be able to go under the ball easier. Then you've got those options for all different scenarios. So it's not a case like the guys on tour where you have to carry different wedges for different locations. You've got it all set up in the bag already. Good question, that one.
It's a really good question, that, and it's something that I changed probably, I would say 4 or 5 years ago now, where I used to have I didn't understand it quite as well as I do now, but I used to have almost like the same bounce right the way through. If I had 3 wedges in the bag, they'd all be almost 8 bounce or whatever it would be. Whereas now I only have a 2 wedge system. 58 has got the 10 S grind, and then I've got my 12 in the 54 with the D grind. But when I get in a wet situation where you get those sort of muddy lies this time of year, I can get my 54 out and get that bounce working on it a little bit more. Whereas the 10 bounce or the S grind might dig in just a fraction too much for me. So it just gives you that confidence as well to be able to maneuver around with different wedges.
Yeah,
really good question, that.
Yeah, that's I think on the fitting side as well. When you are getting fitted for the wedges, blind testing is the key. So hit the clubs without knowing what they are from all these different locations. And when you are testing them, test that club in a location that you'd hit it from. So when you're working with your fitter, say to him, well, I'd only use my sand wedge maybe from a distance bunker shot for pitching, and then maybe a few bumper runs. So test the wedges in those locations where you'd use them. And with the lob wedge, say I only use it next to the green. I never hit 4 shots with it. So just find stuff that works in the areas that you're going to use it in.
Yeah, and put that wedge through its paces, as in go to a lie, because a lot of people will want to tee you up and give you a nice juicy lie just to get but put yourself into some awkward positions. Chuck the ball in a bunker and play some, from deep sand, play a bit from a little bit of tight packed sand, and just see how the club reacts, and you'll start to get a sense of what feels right and doesn't feel right. When I spent a bit of time with Will when we were up at Titleist in Cambridge, that's exactly what he did. First thing he did was blind test. Write down, I want you to hit this. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Play this. And it's the best way, because you start to get a sense of what the soul is trying to do on with the ground.
Definitely, yeah. And like you say, put it through its paces. A lot of the players I work with, Wade Ormsby is a really good example. He's a real quality wedge player. If you get a chance to watch a few videos of him chip and hit bunker shots. But when we go out and test his new lob wedge, he's got quite a specific grind on there. So you go out and make sure it's right. He gets a golf ball and throws it down in the rough and then taps it down. He puts it in the worst light possible to make sure it works from there. Because he knows if it works from there, it's going to work when it's a good light as well. So really good thing to do. Make it harder than it should be, if you know what I mean. And then you'll get the best wedges in the bag. Yeah,
absolutely. Matt, thank you very much for your question, mate. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much. Sounds like I've got a bit of testing to do then.
You do, yeah. Good luck with it, all right?
Cheers, guys.
Thanks,
Cheers now.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Yes, very good. Good question, that. Put yourself under the pressure of tough situations as much as you can, isn't it? That's the message with that one.
Definitely,
okay. We have another guest lined up. We're coming in thick and fast now. So this is Justin. Hello, Justin.
Hi, guys.
Good evening, Justin.
Yeah.
I suppose my question is there an indicative sort of bounce you should, or any advice around what type of bounce you should use? And I think, Dan, you mentioned it earlier around sort of harder conditions versus softer conditions. So, for example, you're playing in the UK, it's really soft versus, say, maybe South Africa where it's harder. Is there any sort of indicative advice? I know bounce is linked to how you strike the ball, the depth of your divot, etc. But is there any sort of indicative advice? Should you have 2 sets of wedges, for example, if let's say I'm going home to South Africa and it's hard, and I take my so-called winter wedges, I call them. I suppose that's my question. Is there any advice to us about that?
Yeah, definitely. We've got quite a lot of South African players on European tour, and generally, as a trend, South Africans generally have really good short games. So I think a lot of that is from where you've grown up and where the ground's a little bit firmer. That really helps with that strike and getting that kind of feel. So the best thing to do is have, like you say, if you can, have those 2 sets of wedges, because you're playing 2 very different conditions there. So see if you can do some testing in South Africa and then do some testing in the UK. Justin Harding's a really good example. So he went actually and worked with Bob and Aaron in the States when he was playing PGA Tour. And they set him up with 2 different options. So when he plays fescue or South Africa, he has an S grind in his sand wedge and then a T grind in the lob wedge. So he's got a smoother sole on the sand wedge and a little bit less bounce on the lob wedge. And then when he goes and plays the Bermuda grass, where it's a little bit softer, maybe kind of almost UK conditions when it's soft, if you know what I mean, he plays an M grind and then an L grind, which are 2 clubs with hard lines through the sole, so that kind of arrow. And it just gives him the benefits, and he can almost play the same short game in both areas and just use the wedge to help him out in that situation. So at least probably have a couple of lob wedges, have something that works in South Africa and works in UK, and just switch between the 2.
And Will, would you have varied bounce, I suppose, for the versatility? So would you tend to have a higher bounce, say in the UK, but with a range, whereas maybe back, let's say South Africa, you have a lower bounce, but you also have some higher bounce for different situations? Would you have a varied bounce within your wedge set as such?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, like we said, it's the easiest way to add versatility to your game. It reduces the amount of shots you have to learn and you have to hit yourself, and just by having wedges with those certain bounces, they'll kind of point you towards a certain shot or help you with a certain shot. So yeah, just make sure you've got a setup that works in both locations. The lob wedge is the kind of the key for that. Make sure you've got a lob wedge that works wherever you play in the golf. But then the sand wedge and gap wedge is something that can be a little bit more versatile, something that you can have that flows through your bag and is the mainstays, they're kind of stalwarts of your bag.
So thank you, and just to say to Dan and Lee, great show, guys. You got best course vlogs out there. Just
thank you, Justin. Cheers, mate. I think Will. Cheers, I think that's a great question, because there's a lot of people out there that don't have the resources to, let's say, have 2 sets of wedges, do they? But if you're going to travel a little bit from South Africa to the UK or something, then obviously that's important to probably get that right. But for me, I was somebody that I'm not going to change my wedges all the time. So I feel like I found a happy medium there with certainly the S grind and a 10 bounce is my, I love that. I love that grind. I think it's so versatile. I can do anything I want to do with it, because it's enough bounce to give me some confidence, but it's a little bit less bounce that I know I can open that club up and do what I want to do with it. So it works for me in the UK in the summer, and it works for me if I'm abroad or in the winter in the UK, So
yeah, I think that's the beauty of the testing side of it. When you go through the blind testing and hit shots from different locations, find something that's a bit firmer, somewhere's a bit softer. And if you can get a wedge that works in both those locations, it saves that need to have to change when the weather changes. So we talk about familiarity. The longer you can keep a wedge in there, and the longer you can kind of keep it when you're going to play a links course, say you go on holiday, or you go over to Portugal and play a bit of golf over there, and then you come back to your home club. If you've gone through that blind testing process and tested all the options and made sure you got the right one, you're going to be closer to that middle ground and to your center. So you won't have to go and change product as much.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Another good question. Really, really good. They're coming in thick and fast, these questions, aren't they, tonight? It's good. What else have we got there, Lee?
Right, so we're going to bring in a question that was sent to you via one of your social medias, and I've got a nice little slide lined up for it as well. So Will can answer this question at the same time as I can.
Yeah. Can you explain the different grinds then?
Yes. Okay, so we'll start on the left-hand side. So we've got F grind there, so full sole grind. So you can see that's the only option we have in pitching wedge and gap wedge. There's 2 options in the gap wedge, different bounce. You've got the 12 and the 8. So if you look at this matrix, it gets a bit confusing. It looks like there's a lot going on there. Firstly, I'll say when you do the testing, try and do blind testing so you don't know what you're trying, and that just takes all of the confusion out of it. All you have to do is hit shots. Literally have a fitter pass you the golf club by the grip, and you just hit shots and tell them which one you like the feel of the best from all these different locations. And then when you get out at the end of the fitting process, you'll have a club in your hands that works the best. There's a really good story from Vokey. He was testing with Adam Scott, and Adam came on the truck, and I need something that I play out of bunkers, and I need to hit it a little bit higher. I need to be able to get a bit more speed and get a bit more spin on it. I think I need an L grind, so I need less bounce. Real common misconception that low bounce will be able to help you spin it and hit it higher. So Vokey got a few out of the draw. So we got L grind out, have a look at that. Yeah, that looks good. So we got a low bounce K grind. So you see there, forgiving bunker club in the K grind. Showed Adam, not a chance I'm using that. That looks terrible. Massive wide sole, awful thing. So Vogue kind of made him up, went out to the bunker with him, hit a few shots, and Vogue had the K grind in his hand and was just raking golf balls around with it, kind of knocking them in front of him. Adam was hitting a few of the L grinds. Wasn't quite getting what he needed out of it. It was coming out a bit short, a little bit soft. So when they were chatting, Vokey just passed him the K grind without telling him what it was, just passed him the grip. Hit 3 shots with it. What is that? That's the best bunker club I've ever used. It's phenomenal. Turns it upside down and it's a wide sole that he has on the K grind. Turns up at the Masters about 6 months later and wins the Masters using it. Still in the bag today. So that's a real good example of not having to worry about what it says on the sole or what it is. Just use the one that works the best when you go through the blind testing. To give you guys a bit of an idea, of what each one does. I've highlighted them there. So you can see in the D, S and M, they're almost like the mainstay. They're both available in sand wedge and lob wedge. So you've got high bounce crescent grind, the one Dan plays in his sand wedge, which he likes. And then we've got the TaylorMade Relief on the S grind, which is just that Steve Stricker one where they're taking a bit off the back of the F grind. And then you've got a low bounce crescent grind, which is in the M. So they're kind of the mainstay of the sand wedge, lob wedge kind of family. If you move on to the K and the L grind, they're specialist lob wedges. So you can only get them in 58 and 60. And the L grind is just in a 60. And they give you 2 very different options. So the L grind is a real versatile low bounce option. So when it gets really firm or you're really shallow with your short game, L grind is a good option to test. Whereas if you need a bit of help out the bunker or need a bit more forgiveness that way, a K grind is a good option as well. So we've got 14 bounce on the one in the main lineup, which is just going to help get the club through the sand a little bit easier, and a real good option to go to if you're struggling with getting that bounce on the ground, or you feel like you're kind of digging the leading edge in a little bit. That extra bit of bounce will give you a safety net and just help get the club through the ground.
Just a quick one with Adam Scott there. I mean, two things. Was what was the bounce that he was using in that K grind that he's got in the bag now?
6 bounce. So
6 bounce in the K grind. So
yeah,
was it? Do you think it was more of the? I suppose the because of Adam Scott is as class as it gets when it comes to ball striking. I mean, there's not much that's been able to beat him over the years with that. But was it a pride thing? Do you think it was more that? Yeah. Like he was like, hang on, that's not me. Like that's not my game. I don't want that in my golf bag looking at me.
Yeah.
Do you think that's what? Because I mean, it's the ego thing, isn't it? You know, I remember when I moved into a 14 bounce in the F grind when I was someone who really was struggling with my short game. Putting that 56 degree F 14 bounce was an absolute godsend for me because it gave me the opportunity to learn how to use the bounce a bit more and learn how to use the club.
So it's a massive misconception. I think a lot of players think the better you get, the lower the bounce you need. So I see a lot of good players and they'll go in the store and they'll go and pick up an L grind, an M grind in the sand wedge and an 8 bounce in the gap wedge because they think they're better players, so they need low bounce because it's versatility. At the end of the day, when you're standing on the last hole of your club championship and you need to get up and down, you don't care what it looks like on the solve. You don't care what number it's got on it. You just want to know it's going to work for you. And I can imagine Adam Scott was coming down the stretch of the Masters not thinking, oh, I've got a K grind in the bag. It's terrible. I've got a wedge in the bag that I know I can chip it close with. I know it works for me out of bunkers. So it just gives you that confidence. You very quickly forget what something looks like if it works.
Yeah. And I think that's quite that's quite a good message there of once you find something you kind of like, that almost sticking with it over time is not a bad thing. I think about my brother and he and Lee's got a picture there of his wedge that you made up for him this year when it was when he was playing last year when he was playing the European Tour event, which is a 58 degree L grind, which is a proto one, but that's not actually on the market, but it was on the market. Does that make sense? So you used to have that's quite a low bounce. Obviously I think there's like 4 degrees of bounce on that particular one.
Yeah.
And I take Paul back to 2015. He's playing at Burnham and Barrow and he's tucked. He's got himself into a position. He's coming up 18 for the British PGA Championships. And he's short-sided himself now, bunker, flag, nothing to work with. And he went into, obviously goes to his L grind 58 degree, and I think he managed to get up and down to win the tournament. And and it's having those sort of, a bit like what Adam Scott went through with the Masters. Once you find something that you just stick with it, don't you?
Yeah, that's right, exactly. Yeah. So with the L grind, obviously it came out of the main lineup of wedges when we moved into SM8. The reason wedges come and go, we found that option wasn't very popular. So not many people had it. There's not many guys on tour playing it. So it just slowly moves out the main lineup. But what that does is create space for better things and more popular products to come in there. We work on demand, whether it's demand from retail or tour players. We want to give people what they want and what they use best and what we find comes out most often in fittings. So when we get a product like a 58L, we've got a few tour players using it, but not enough to make it a mainstay in the lineup. So it's kind of, we've learned a lot from it. We've learned a lot from that grind, and we've got it in the 60 degree still, where we found a few people who are using it because they want that extra low bounce. But we just make sure we've got space in there to add extra things in that we think are going to help people a lot more than that product that's already there.
Do you think that one might come back into the lineup, or do you think that will just stay as a Wedgeworks option?
Who knows? Who knows? Yeah, we'll see. Whatever, like we say, it's all demand. If we find a massive demand for it, it will come back. On
that note, whilst we're on that, how much input do you have? I know America obviously is the hub of where everything kind of happens with the producing of the products, but how much of an impact or input do you have with R&D, with creating and giving feedback from not just people like myself, but the amateur golfers that you deal with, and also the tour players? How much do you have involved with Vokey himself and the team over there?
Yeah, so that's a really exciting part of my job. The guys have kind of graciously given me kind of scope to give them feedback. So when I find something that's really popular on European soil, what I'll do is make a copy of the head, send it over to them for them to have a look at. They'll test it, they'll see how it works, they'll see why it's working well. So I've got different options, things like the T grind and the low bounce K. Aaron brought them over when we had the Open at Carnoustie because it was really firm, so we need some lower bounce options. A few guys put them in play, and then when kind of Aaron goes home and we go away from the Open, they kept him in play afterwards and really enjoyed them. And a few more guys requested it. So just by having that initial test in there, guys went away, played it. I went back to Aaron and said, look, this T-grind thing is going really well. Like, the guys want it, they want to play it, they want to use it. And from that way, they brought T-grind kind of back to being slightly more popular and released it on Wedgeworks. So I was literally on the phone to Aaron before I came on with you today, just talking through options and make sure we catch up and make sure we're able to provide all the players in the world the best products. So that takes feedback from everywhere.
Just so people know, Aaron is kind of Bob's right-hand man. Is that kind of how it works over in the States?
Yeah, so Aaron's the PGA Tour Vokey Wedge rep. Okay. Yeah, so he's out on PGA Tour, seeing the players week in, week out, and kind of sort of doing the same thing along the same lines as what I do on the truck in Europe. Yeah.
Okay. Lee, what have we got? Producer Lee.
So a couple of just sort of should be quick answer questions, really. And this one is quite a good question, considering that most of, if not all, the other brands now do it. And that is, why don't Titleist offer grooves across the whole face?
Interesting question. So with grooves across the face, it's a case of why do you need them across the face? And if it's a point of you're striking the golf ball from there, then it might be looking at going down a fitting route or having a little look at technique. We do a lot of work with CG and the strike location on the wedges. And we find that, especially with tour players, obviously they're going to strike it kind of more central in the club. But at the same time, amateurs, when we've tested that, there's not many guys hitting it out of that toe location. If it's something where you think you can gain spin from, like when you hit that bad shot and it comes out the shiny part of the toe, at the end of the day, if you're hitting your driver that far out the toe, you wouldn't say, let's put more face there. You'd say, let's go for a driver fit. So some people like the visual of it. That might be the case. We've never really had anyone request it on tour. It's not something guys want to look at. We like to keep the Vokey lineup looking classic. Everyone, when you pull it and sit it down, you want to know it's a Vokey before you even look to the back. So we want to keep classic looking wedges there. Like we say, if you do see marks on your wedges where it goes into that shiny part, generally it's going to be from sand splash, not necessarily ball mark. That's the big key. You've got to kind of separate those two things. if you look at it from another point, if you hit your 7 iron out of that shiny part on the toe, you're not going to ask them to put grooves on there. You're just going to work on hitting it more central. So there's a lot of different things, and I know a lot of companies like to do it, and it's just a kind of a point of difference. But we've never found any performance benefit from having grooves in the toe. And at the end of the day, we're all there to make the wedge perform better and be the best grooves, be the best CG. So we've explored that option. There's wedges been made up in R&D to test it, but we've never found a good enough benefit to push that into the main line.
And that's a good one, because when I was up again with you, we were doing some blind testing and things like that. One of my issues that I had when you popped my wedge in the vise was I was striking it quite a lot out of the toe, and mainly the lob wedge was what was happening. I was catching it a lot out of the toe, and I think you flattened it down. You just popped it down a couple of degrees. I think I was like 1 degree flat at that time, and then you moved that club down 2 more degrees, and we moved that strike location, came across the face just without having to do anything. So having set up, getting people to test their setups as well with whoever's working on their clubs is an important part, isn't it? You know, not all your clubs are going to be like, for me, 2 degrees flat. My 58 is 3 degrees flat, because I know I'm going to be playing some softer shots, and the club's going to the handle's going to lay down just that little bit more, and I need to get that strike location a little bit across the face. So moving strike location by changing the way in which the characteristics of the club work is important as well.
Oh, definitely, yeah. That's another key part of the fitting process. Make sure you get the lie angles right through your wedges. A few people like to move on to different shafts, go softer in those wedges to get a bit more feel on the finesse shots. When you slow the club down, the shaft's not going to bend as much. So if you've got, say, an X100 in your 9-iron, you're going to be applying quite a lot of force to hit that golf ball. When you move down to your sand wedge and you're hitting a 50-yard pitch, you're not applying the same amount of force. So we need to retain that slight bend in the shaft to retain the same feel. So maybe moving from an X100 to an S400 or an S300, depending on how much you want to change it. But then at the same time, you have to manage lie angle. So it is that all-encompassing fitting. So make sure you have all aspects of the club working.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was a question, wasn't there, Lee, on shafts? Maybe was there one in there that people were talking about with different shafts? I know that should you have the same? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
that one there, perfect. So should you have the same custom fit shafts that you've got in your irons and put the same in your wedges? So what's your take on that?
It's definitely a good way to go. I'd recommend putting the same shaft as your irons and your wedges for the ones you hit full. So pitch and wedge, gap wedge. If you play your sand wedge as just a full shot club all the time, then yeah, that's a good idea. When you move into the wedges, you might, when there's a sand wedge, lob wedge, the partial shot clubs, you might want to just soften it up a little bit. At the same time as saying that, we put S200s in the demo wedges and the wedges you'll get fitted with. One thing I'd say to people, if you're testing a lob wedge and you're seeing some really good results with that, don't feel like you've got to put the same shaft as your irons in. So try and keep it as close to the wedge that you've tried in the fitting as you can, and make sure you've got the product in there that you've tested, you've liked, and you've enjoyed. So yeah, don't be scared of going really soft in your wedges. If you're kind of an X100 player and you're testing an S200 in the wedges and it's working great, don't feel like you have to go for that X100. But
would you recommend then on that sort of basis, because I know I'm doing it and so is Dan, I believe, is we have the same sort of spec of shaft, but instead of having like the 6.5, we have the 5.5 and a lob wedge. Yeah. Would you recommend sort of keeping the same profile the same, but maybe just a softer shaft in that version?
Yeah, exactly. That's a real good way to do it. Obviously, shafts have different balance points. So if you change shaft, it will change the feel and change where the weight is in the shaft. So if you're, like you say, an X100 player, then dropping down a flex lighter is definitely going to help. So if you go from a 6 to a 5.5, or say you're a Nippon 120 player, go from the X to the stiff when you get down to the wedges. It's a real sensible thing to do. And like we say, it's going to retain that feel and help them little touch finesse shots.
Yeah, so for me, I always remember when I got first fitted into, I think I had some Mizuno wedges quite a few years ago, and I was always a Project X 6.0 golfer. I have been for quite a few years now, and I had my sand wedge and lob wedge in 6.0 the same, and I just, and Mizuno have been renowned for having a soft feel and all of those sorts of things. And they felt so hard, and I was blaming the head. I was blaming the head, but it was actually the fact that I had these, properly decent stiff shafts in the wedges that just weren't helping. So now, in the past, I've had gap wedges of 50 degrees or 52 degrees that I've stuck with that 6.0. But I carry now in my lob wedge and my sand wedge, I carry 5.5, so just a slight softer shaft.
And to that point we were talking about earlier with flight, if you soften shafts up, the ball actually flies lower. So if you ever say you put an X100 in a lob wedge and then hit that compared to an S200, the X1 will go higher and the S2 will go lower. It's all to do with deflection of the shaft. But that's another thing. If you get a chance to test some wedges, try and test shafts at the same time as well, if you've got access to that, and just find something that works best for you, something that gives you the feel that you're looking for.
Yeah, yeah. And I know you guys you're trying to head that way, aren't you, with the changeable heads in the with wedges, which is kind of a new thing. I know that's something you've got.
Yeah, it's a really good pack. So it's called the Vokey Sure Fit system. Like at the National Fitting Centre, we've got all the wedges. So when you come in for a fitting, you get to try whatever wedges you're looking at in the shafts that you're looking at too. So when we go through the blind testing, it's a case of keeping the same shaft but just changing the head. So you get the all-round feel of what you're looking for in that package.
Yeah.
On that sort of basis and on that question, is that something you're looking to put out to the fitters as well? Because obviously I know this year Cleveland have given us a fitting cart with different heads and shaft options, but obviously with the Vokeys we just get pre-glued sort of sets. Is that something they're looking at for the future, to be able to have that options of changing shaft for the actual fitters in the pro shops?
That's right. We do have them out at the moment. There's about 25 Vokey Sure Fit accounts across the UK. So they have a sand wedge with a variety of different shafts. So it's a 56. So you get all the options in the grinds, and then it's a case of the shaft change. That's kind of the tipping point of when you're going to start looking at changing shaft. So it just gives guys the opportunity to try the fitting iron, and then just try a few different options in the shaft in the sand wedge as well, just to make sure you get it bang on.
Right, Lee, I think we've got room for one more. Have we got room for one more question there?
Yeah, we've got room for one more question. It should be a quick one to get us up to the hour, and that is, what is the benefit of the raw finish other than coolness?
It's a good question again. It does look cool. So the benefit of raw is, there used to be a big benefit. So what raw will do when you're hitting shots, you used to get that wear mark on the face with the original SMs and kind of previous to that. You don't really see that anymore. And that's because we've added this heat treatment to the bottom part of the face where you don't get that wear mark as much. It makes the grooves last a little bit longer. So back in the day, players like the raw finish because you never got that wear mark. So it always looked kind of uniform all the time. Up to modern day now, we've actually improved the plating on SM8, and they work really hard on the chroming and then the other finishes, so in the jet black and the brushed steel as well. So we actually make those heads, the grooves, a little bit bigger. So we kind of make them illegal and then use the plating to bring it back to conforming again. So it's something we've just started doing with SM8, and it's a massive performance improvement. So now you'll find with the chrome, the black, brushed steel and raw, you'll all get the same feel and the same spin rate as well. So we've got guys on tour playing chrome, so there's no performance detriment to it because they won't play it if there was. And it's just another option. If you like the look of the chrome, like the kind of the clean cut look, or you like the look of the raw where it goes a little bit rusty and looks like a kind of real working tool, it's literally your choice now. You choose what you want to have the look of, what you want to have in your bag. So there's no performance benefit in there. It's literally just a look thing.
So I heard on the rumour mill from a rep from another company that produces wedges that have raw faces, that the raw face has no benefit in the dry, but has an enhanced benefit when in the wet. So if the face is wet, it will give you more spin with a raw finish than it would if you had just a normal wedge finish. Yeah,
so that's where that chroming comes into play. So by making the grooves bigger and then chroming it to bring them back to legal, we've actually got on the limit. Whereas previously, I think a lot of companies made the wedges where they just made a raw wedge and then plated that. We don't do that. We make two separate heads now. So we have the chrome heads with the bigger grooves that we fill. But at the same time, that takes a lot of technology. It's taken a lot of work to get that chrome in to the quality and to the standard where we know how much is going to affect the groove and how much is going to bring it back to where we need it to be. So it's a real key thing. Like we think of all these things and the guys in the R&D want to make sure it's literally just a choice of like a visual rather than it's a performance choice. So yeah, it's been taking a lot of work to get to this point, but they've managed to do it.
Just looking at the comments, I see Richard Nelsey having a little comment here to say this man is very talented. He even got me chipping well. Is that right, Will?
I think Well is a bit of a stretch, but we got it on the green. No, it was good. We had a really good session out in Spain, actually.
Right.
But yeah, we got some real good work done with Rich. Just blind testing. That's all.
Is that a wedge session or a drinking session?
I think it was a wedge session followed by a drinking session.
Yeah. So that's where blind testing is king. You don't need to know what you're doing. And as a wedge fitter, if there's any wedge fitters on the call, your job is just to give people access to try as many different options as possible. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, brilliant, mate. Right, well, I think that takes us up to our hour, Will. We thank you, obviously, well, a huge thank you for coming on and spending some time with us. And we've had some fantastic questions that have come in that maybe a little bit outside the box as well. It's not just all been about the new SM8 or anything like that. It's more about some technique and things like that. So it's been, it's been really, really good to have you on board. And we thank you for it, mate. Thank you.
No, it's a pleasure. Yeah, thanks for having me, Dan. Thanks for your time.
Problem. Right, everybody, I think that wraps us up for this week's live show. Obviously, thank you very much for watching. Lee, huge thank you to you as well for all your efforts in putting this together. And we'll see everybody next week on our next live show. See you then.